Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing my worst books of the year. These were the 9 books that when I looked over my Goodreads to see over 130 books that I read this year, I was just like, I hated these. Like, these weren't just books I didn't love, these were books like I just strongly hated for one reason or another. First book that I just hated, like the first book I put on this list when I was brainstorming this video, was The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. I've read 2 Riley Sager books. One actually made it on my best books of the year, and that was Lock Every Door. I loved that book. I thought it was an amazing thriller. So I was very excited for The House Across the Lake. The general premise is we have this woman who recently lost her husband, like within the last year. She moves into her family's like cabin out in like the woods, and it's a lakefront property, of course, and she kind of gets involved with this other couple that's across the way. She's kind of spying on them. It's interesting. I like the premise, but I have several huge issues with it. One, the main character was, constantly talking about alcohol and constantly drunk. And I understand sometimes you have like an unreliable narrator. That's one way to set that up. But it was excessive. Like, there would be paragraphs describing like the exact contents of what the character was drinking and everything. And it was really frustrating. I was like, okay, what am I reading this for? And then at the end, the like twist, how everything came together at the end, I was so mad, like furious. I thought it was the most ridiculous twist I've ever read. I'm not going to give away the twist, but basically I felt like it didn't fit in with what had been established previously in this book. I thought it was out of this world, crazy, absurd. I just kept reading it. The only reason I finished it was because I was like, is this it? Is this really it? I couldn't even believe what I was reading, like what I was seeing on the page. I was so shocked, but in like the worst way, where it was just like, what am I reading? Didn't love this. I thought the twist was terrible. It was not for me personally, and I just didn't really connect or like any of the characters. I felt like they were very one note for the most part, and the main character drove me crazy and had like no personality other than being like a grieving widow and alcoholic. That was like, that's not a personality. Those aren't personality traits. Those can be parts of a character, but that's not a personality trait. So those were my critiques of that book. The next one was Caramel Pecan Roll Murder by Joanne Fluke. This is a cozy mystery series. It's a highly popular series. I think this was like book 22 or something crazy. I read this for my TikTok Made Me Read It video. I hated it. I DNFed it after like 40 or 50 pages into like this 300 some page book. That's how much I disliked it. I couldn't get past the first like 40 or 50 pages. The characters were so, I hate this word, but the only thing I could use to describe it is they were so cringy. Like, it was so corny. And I love cozy mysteries. Like, I have, I have all my cozy mysteries here. I love cozy mysteries. So, I can handle some corniness, but this was beyond corny. And the characters, like the dialogue between them was the most awkward, unbelievable dialogue. It didn't make sense. Like, it felt stiff. It felt like nobody would ever say this in real life. It was really strange. That's why I ended up DNFing that book. The next one was The Silent Patient by Michaelides. I enjoyed The Maidens. I thought it was a pretty good thriller, so I wanted to read his other book, The Silent Patient. I read this for a thriller vlog. I'll link it above if you want to hear my in-depth thoughts on that, as well as some of the other thrillers I read for that. I hated this book more than I could possibly express. I didn't actually finish it. I did read about 120 pages or so, almost halfway through it. I did look up what the ending was, and I'm not impressed, honestly. But the reason I ended up DNFing it was because the portrayal of people who are struggling with their mental health in this book it was deplorable. It was truly so distasteful. It was so hateful, and the character, the person we're reading, like his perspective, he works in the mental health field, so to hear the character, we're in his head, and he's describing people with such hatred, and it's just nitpicking people for the worst things, and everybody in that book was stereotyped. Like, every person who was at the mental health facility that the book was like taking place at, everyone was stereotyped in the worst way. Nobody had any personality except for like awful negative features. Like, there was not one. It was so awful. And then the main character is fixated on learning about the silent patient, who is this woman who basically killed her husband Nobody knows why, and she killed him, and ever since then, it's been like 7 years, she hasn't spoken a word. So she's the silent patient, and our main character is obsessed with learning why and talking to her, and he idolizes her to such an extent. But even though she is the titular character for this book, you get to know nothing about her except that she, murdered her husband. Nobody knows why. Apparently she's extremely attractive because every man kept going on about it, and then she is an artist. But it never even goes into her artwork or anything. Like, that was it. And she's the titular character. That's all I learned in 120 pages. So I really just thought there were so many distasteful stereotypes, and language in this book was just it made me so uncomfortable. Like, I just couldn't get through it. It made me, like, my skin crawl. I really, really disliked it. On a lighter note, A Tale of Two Cookies by Eve Calder. This is part of the Cookie House Mystery series. I read the first book in the series. I loved it. It was a 5-star cozy mystery read for me. Fantastic characters, a great mystery. I thought this had such promise, but I got to book 2 and it went downhill a bit, but it wasn't too awful. And then book 3, A Tale of Two Cookies, I couldn't finish it. I found the mystery to be so obnoxious. I found the mystery, like, I didn't find myself caring about the mystery at all. I felt like the characters had, like, this complete personality change from the first book, but there was no explanation as to why that was. So it was really confusing to me, and it just lost the charm that the first book had, and I was so disappointed that the series really went downhill for me personally. If you had that experience, let me know, because I was so optimistic about that book. It was one of the first cozy mysteries I read this year, and I loved it. I was so excited. I thought the series would be like a big winner for me this year, and then it turned out for me that only the book 1 was really good, in my opinion. Next, we have Killer Content by Olivia Blacke. This is another cozy mystery, but it's like a social media twist. Basically, a social media influencer is murdered. However, the connection between the main character and the person who is murdered is that they're, like, co-workers at this cafe. They've just met. It's like they've been together in this, like, working environment for, like, a week. And I could not have cared less about this mystery, and I'll tell you why. One, I've read a lot of cozy mysteries where the murder at first looks like it was an accident or a natural death or something of those sorts. And for whatever reason, the person who was murdered in this, they think, it was like an accident or something of the sorts, like it wasn't a murder, there's no foul play. But our main character in this is insistent that it's not. Fair enough, okay? You have a hunch, you want to follow it, that's great, that's fine. A lot of cozy mysteries and mystery novels are like that. But this character kept going and going and going and trying to uncover clues and was, like, adamant that this person had been murdered. Yet she had no proof. Like, I read over half this book before I DNFed it, and she had made no progress on the case. She had had police officers tell her that the evidence back from, like, the autopsy didn't match up. Like, there was no reason to think it was foul play, and she had been denied at every single corner for, like, why she thought it was a murder, and she was still going, and this is just a person she just met, so it was almost, like, obsessive to a point. Like, I could not for the life of me figure out why our main character cared so much about this person that was dead when nobody else in the whole book thought that she'd been murdered. There was no signs that she'd been murdered. There was nothing tangible, and we're over halfway into the book, and there's been nothing. There was also just a lot of strange scenes that just seemed really out of place. So you'd be reading and then suddenly this scene would happen and you're just sitting there like, what? Like, it didn't feel cohesive at all to me. Like, I felt like I just didn't care at that point. I didn't care about the possible murder. I couldn't figure out what the main character's problem was. The plot wasn't cohesive. I was just really disappointed by it. There was also a ton of, like, very forced social media talk and, like, hashtag uses, and it was, like, really over the top. Like, I understand the person was an influencer, but it was, like, just hitting you over the head with it, and I was like, okay, I don't need all of this, like, just drilled into me. Like, I get it, but it was too much. The next one is Murder by Page 1 by Olivia Matthews. I was very excited about this. It's a bookish cozy mystery, and I'll keep it short with this one. It was so boring. I read the whole thing. Every character in this was not memorable. They weren't interesting. I was not compelled or interested in any of them. There was nothing horribly wrong with any of them, but they were just so one note, so boring. The mystery itself was fine, but it was pretty predictable. It was pretty flat. There just really wasn't very much drama, And in a murder mystery, I'm kind of looking for a level of drama. Like, someone got murdered. That's pretty darn dramatic. Like, that should make instant drama in a book, right? But it was so boring. I read the whole thing. I read that for that TikTok video as well, and I just really disliked it. I thought the main character, again, was very flat. I thought the secondary characters were all flat. Like, I was so bored. I was really incredibly bored. This was just there was nothing in particular that I can put my finger on that was terrible. It just was boring, like, in every aspect, and that's what made it a really poor read for me this year, unfortunately. The next one is Brooklyn on Fire by Lawrence H. Levy. This is the second book in the Mary Hindley mystery series. It's historical fiction, and I did enjoy the first book. I thought there were some issues with it, but I enjoyed it enough where I wanted to read book 2, see what it was all about. So our main character in this is Mary, and she is, in the second book, opening up her own, like, little detective firm, trying to get detective cases, and she's a woman, in the 1900s. This isn't going great for her because not many people are taking her seriously, unfortunately. And this book, there was a couple of things. One, I found this in both book 1 and 2, is that the action scenes were very awkwardly written. Like, I would read it, and then there would be something really strange about the writing. Like, the bullets were, like, whizzing by her, and she dodged it dramatically, and, like, it was very over the top and unbelievable, the action scenes, and would kind of throw you out of what you were reading because it was so distracting the way it was written, in my opinion. And then in terms of, like, the historical fiction side of things, I love it when authors use a lot of historical details. I really love historical fiction, but this author name dropped, like, his life depended on it. Like, there were so many names that were dropped of famous inventors and this and that, and, like, they weren't connected a lot of times to the actual plot, so it just felt useless and, like, kind of braggy, and it was just awkward. Like, I kept having these moments where, either with the name dropping or the action scenes, where it was just so strange. Like, I would completely lose focus on what I was reading because that detail would just like, red flag. Like, it was just so weird. Like, it would throw me out of what I was reading, so I couldn't really enjoy the experience. So I ended up DNFing that book about halfway through, and I won't be returning to that series, unfortunately. Next, we have The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. I really enjoyed The Guest List and The Paris Apartment, so I wanted to go and read another one. The Hunting Party is basically a kind of closed mystery. It takes place during winter. It's a group of, like, college friends who get together every New Year's Eve. They spend on these extravagant trips, and they're going off in, like, the remote, like, middle of nowhere in a forest during the winter, and they're snowed in, and someone ends up dying. It's, it's not looking good. Everything about this, I loved the setup, I loved the general premise. I was really excited because Lucy Foley usually has very fast-paced thrillers, but this one I found lagged a lot in the first half. It was very slow, especially for the other books I had read from her, but I continued reading because I was expecting a good payoff, but in the end, I didn't end up caring about any of these characters. I mean, like her other books, these characters were all deeply flawed, but I didn't care about any of them. I didn't even care about the person who died. Like, I didn't even feel that bad for them. I just sat there and was like, okay, like, I guess that's fine. And for a thriller, I want to be sitting there on the edge of my seat, like, very engaged, very interested. And these characters, I just could care less about them. I thought some of the details were really strange. I thought who did it was very obvious, and it just didn't come together for me. I really was disappointed with this, and I'd say my biggest critique was mostly the pacing, and then I just didn't care about any of the characters. Usually her characters are very flawed, but I usually have a couple that I do care about, or at least are very interested in, and all of these just felt flat across the board. Like, I just didn't care about them as people whatsoever, which kind of, when you're reading from multiple points of view, that really destroys the story for me when I don't care about any of them. It's kind of like, especially after I've been inside their head, I'm reading from their perspective, like, I should care at least a little bit about each of their storylines, but I didn't. So unfortunately, this one just wasn't it for me. And our last one is another cozy. It's All Sales Final by Josie Bell. This is the last book in the Goodbye Girls cozy mystery series. I read the first were first books in the series, and I kind of gave them mixed ratings. They were mostly like average to me, but I did enjoy the theme. I thought the characters were good. They really grew on me over time. And Josie Bell is actually a pseudonym for Jen McKinley, who's one of my favorite cozy mystery writers. She writes the Cupcake Mystery series, which I have back here, and I really like her work. This one was earlier. She published this before some of the stuff I had read, so I could tell it was maybe not quite as polished as some of her later works are, but I was still enjoying it, and I was excited for the last book in the series, and even a little sad just because it would be the end of it. It hasn't, new releases haven't come out for it in a long time. Unfortunately, this book, it read more like a romance than it did a mystery. Like, it's supposed to be a cozy mystery series, but the mystery was almost like a side note. The main character in this is getting married, so of course you're going to expect some wedding talk and stuff like that, wedding planning, all of that. That's fine, that's great. But this book focused so heavily on like the wedding planning and the relationship, and the mystery really felt like just a side thought, like an afterthought, which I found to be very strange for a mystery series. Like, it's specifically marketed as a mystery, and I just found myself completely uninterested in the mystery. It was really flat. There was also this weird moment at the end that I won't give the specific details for, but it kind of broke the world building for me. It was just kind of a weird detail to throw in there just to make it more interesting, I guess, but I was like, this doesn't fit with the series at all. It felt very out of place, so it felt very disconnected from the rest of the series, so I'm just gonna kind of pretend it didn't exist and enjoy my memory of the other books in the series. It just wasn't my favorite, personally. If you like a romance-heavy one, you might enjoy this series more, but it just wasn't for me and what I'm looking for, personally. Alright guys, that is the end of this video. Thank you guys for watching. Please let me know down below what are the worst books you read this year and what made them not favorites for you. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I do upload new videos every single week on book content, especially in the mystery, historical fiction, and classic genres if you enjoy those. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!